Aggregated data from electronic medical records can provide great insights for clinical trials, drug marketing, and academic research. But what's the most cost-effective and secure way to bring all this information together? Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz Podcast, where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Terry Myerson, CEO and co-founder of Truveta, whose mission is saving lives with data. Do you like this show? I hope so. And if you do, please subscribe and leave a review. Terry, welcome to the HealthBiz Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Outstanding. Well, let's talk. We're going to talk about Truveta, but I want to talk about earlier days before that. I'd love to hear a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, and any influences that have stuck with you throughout your career.
Oh, gosh. I mean, that's such an opening question. I mean, I was born in Connecticut, but I grew up in Florida, made my way to Duke University, proud Blue Devil, big Duke fan. I now have two boys. One boy graduated Duke. My other son's playing soccer there now. And I'm majoring in mechanical engineering, ironically. So that was where I didn't start out pre-med, but I found organic chemistry a little hard, a lot of memorization that I wasn't that so good at. So then I made my way into mechanical engineering, which I haven't really used in my career. But summer after my sophomore year, I got an opportunity at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and started doing scientific data visualization and fell in love with computer graphics and computer programming. And that's, somewhere from pre-med to mechanical engineering to computer programming. But, this is the 80s. So it's dating myself. It's different.
It sounds pretty straightforward. I think I'm slightly older than you anyway. So I get that. We can talk about acoustic couplers and all that stuff if we want to. But also, Duke was hard to get into then, but harder now. And I have a friend who got only one of his two boys got into Duke. So if you had two, you're ahead of him.
Yeah,
so he's a fellow listener. So after the EPA, I saw you did some sort of supercomputing in North Carolina back when that was a thing, and then started your own company. Is that right?
This is going back. We're talking. This is 89, 90. We're talking. So at the EPA. That evolved into a project to study acid rain and then do scientific data visualization of acid rain, which was today we talk a lot about global warming, but if you roll back to the 80s, acid rain was a big concern. I remember doing a demo to Al Gore, who at the time, was a senator. But the North Carolina Supercomputing Center had the simulation models. They had the big silicon graphics computers that were doing the big amazing videos. And so I made my way through there. And then I made my way to Washington, D.C. to actually do scientific data visualization for NASA Ames and the Naval Research Lab and bunch of National Institute of Health. And from there, I got exposed to the internet. And myself and a group of other folks co-founded a company in 94 to do, again, data analytics and visualization of, build websites. And then Microsoft acquired that company in 97. And then I joined Microsoft in March 97. And I really had no plan. I, moved to Seattle and, met a girl, had a family. 21 and a half years later, left Microsoft. So there's a lot, 21 and a half years too, but it's just kind of a depth.
So if I get this right, so the idea is you're supposed to have a charmed upbringing in various places, go to a top school, find some interesting stuff along the way, even if it means it was a hard class you dropped out of in order to go or not, didn't drop out of, but went to change majors and then just ended up finding your way along and just go to do interesting stuff and then work for a great company at the right time. And is that basically it?
Well, I mean, if you go back to 94, the customers that I was working with, I remember distinctly a meeting at National Institute of Health where I was shown this Silicon Graphics, Silicon Surf website. And I went back to my company and said, hey, we should build a website. And they're like, no, we don't know what that is. We don't do websites. And that frustrated me and my colleagues. And so we started this company to go build these websites. And then, I was living in Northern Virginia at the time. And so, no, I mean, this is sort of this is a random walk. all in passion and interest. And that led me to Microsoft. And then within Microsoft, it was, a whole variety of careers, I think, that started with internet services. Email was a leading internet service. I mean, we got to really roll back the clock now. So Outlook and Exchange competing with Lotus Notes. And then, BlackBerry was the mobile device. And then, so that led to connected the email and Exchange. And so that led me to the mobile efforts inside Microsoft, and then every device became mobile. And so that led to Windows, and then every device leads computer graphics, and that led to Xbox and Windows, so it's all connected until really, 2020 when the pandemic hit. And that I would say that was really I developed this interest in data science and life sciences in my post Microsoft. So after Microsoft, I did join a venture capital firm to sort of learn and stay fresh with people and ideas. And, when this pandemic hit, it just opened my eyes that we don't have the data to make public health decisions. An old colleague had become chief information officer of Providence Healthcare, and so exposed me to how inside Providence, they didn't have the tools to quickly ask and answer questions about how to best take care of patients. And Rod Hockman, CEO of Providence, kind of talked to me about some of the industry complexities and, of trying to achieve, and how himself and other leaders of other major healthcare systems have been talking for some time about building a consortium to put their data together. And out of that came Truveta, which was kind of you can look through my life and try and see how there's these threads that are connecting to it. But healthcare, life sciences, I'm learning so much every day. And I'm so fortunate to be working with these incredible colleagues at the healthcare systems and at our customers to apply, all the data and analytics experience I've built previously to the domain.
I like to connect these long arcs. So to me, I'll take it back to organic chemistry, right? Like that's really hard. You need to do that for going to medical school. So put that aside for, let's say, 30 or 40 years. And then you come back and say, now you've solved these problems at, Microsoft, and now you want to get into something which is pretty hard, which is how do you make sense and any value out of all this healthcare data, never mind, not just with one institution, but across a whole consortium of them. So I think you found a good problem to hit your head on, but that one is worth solving, or at least solving a piece of it.
Definitely. I mean, this is the mission side. The technical challenges are fun and incredibly hard, but the mission of what we're trying to achieve and the purpose of what we're trying, that was very grounded for me in those early days of 2020 when we didn't know how to take care of the patients in the communities. And it definitely feels like the most meaningful thing I've ever worked on. And I'm working with the most mission-driven people I've ever worked with. And so that's just I feel incredibly lucky for that.
Now, the company, you sort of answered my question in a sense. Is Truveta, would you consider it a company? Is it a collective? Why this sort of organization of it?
Well, at the core, we are a collective of healthcare systems. And, with this shared mission of saving lives with data, I do believe to very important to build momentum and to create focus, you actually have to have not only mission alignment, but also economic incentives and economic alignment. So Truveta is a company, and, we are a tax-paying company, but the governance of the company is the healthcare members that, contribute the data to the company. And I think that sort of mission and economic alignment is critical to, creating prioritization and creating the momentum.
Now, what has the evolution been like? And obviously it started with some discussions, you brought some organizations into it. How has it evolved, and what would you kind of check off as your achievements up to this point?
I don't know. The word achievements is kind of in terms of, the company did start with 4 health systems, Providence Healthcare, Advocate Aurora Healthcare, which is now part of Advocate Healthcare, Trinity Healthcare, and Tenet Healthcare, and Northwell Health was right behind. And we have expanded from those 5 health systems, now 30 health systems, come Spirit Health, Henry Ford Health, Advent Health, Memorial Hermann Health, Baylor Scott and White Health, Novant Health. Incredible. I feel incredibly fortunate to be working with these just incredible organizations. And, I think and then also we have this incredible team that's been very committed to this mission and taking on the technical challenges of, building this complete, timely, and clean regulatory grade data set. And, along the way, there's been, I think incredible things we're proud of, whether it's be contributing to Pfizer's work to track the safety of the COVID vaccine, or contributing to Boston Scientific's incredible work to study the health equity of peripheral artery disease. The CDC is now a customer, which is just an incredible honor to be, when we started the company, there was this idea that the CDC didn't have all the data it needed to pursue their mission to protect the communities. And then so now to have the CDC working directly with us and the data is an incredible honor. And there's more. There's just various things along the way. It's hard, Pfizer was our first customer, incredibly honored and humbled that, Boston Scientific was right there with them. Those visionary leaders that saw the potential of what we were doing is just incredible. I would say the CDC was another major milestone. And then, we've shared, there's now 100 customers working with the data, which is, I love all of them.
Good. All right. Well, I thought for a minute there, when you were thinking of, achievements, I thought you weren't going to be able to think of any. Now it was more a matter of, you have so many, you got to give me just the top few. So that's how I'll take it.
Well, it's just not a humble word. I don't know that, this is such a, this is a long journey to achieve, to really bring, those really data-driven insights to how we take care of our communities and every single patient, and bringing together that complete, timely, clean data set. We're 5 years into this and we are not halfway done.
So let's talk about this term that you just mentioned, and I was going to bring up anyway, regulatory grade. So when I hear a term like that, the first thing it reminds me of is like the GMC commercials, like commercial grade, but there's a big reason why you say regulatory grade. So let's get into that, but also something that is a heck of a lot easier to come up with a good term for it than to actually achieve it. So can we talk about, why this concept of regulatory grade data is necessary, and then the things you've done to get toward that?
Well, I think throughout healthcare, you have this taxonomy of research grade and regulatory grade. It shows up in lab tests. You can do lab tests that are RUO, or you can do lab tests that are, clinical grade. And so, with data now, I think we have the same thing. There's a lot of data out there, but you don't know where it came from. You don't know how it was been transformed. You don't know exactly. It's just a data set that's on a disk. Now, what decisions can you make with that? Well, you can definitely query it and maybe learn something from it, but can you really make mission critical decisions? Can you? And in the case of the regulators in healthcare, CDC, FDA, CMS, they're taking responsibility for taking care of our country. And so for them, they have published very clear and very stringent guidelines in the case of FDA, what they expect to see in data, clear provenance, clear audit trails of transformations. And I understand, because today you have these very slow, very expensive clinical trials and registries that are used to make so many decisions, but they have a level of confidence and accuracy and comfort with those data sets that are acquired very slowly and very expensively. And so we're now creating this data set that, really with just a query, you can replace a whole clinical trial, replace a whole registry. And what we need to do is build confidence in all the people using this data. They can make decisions with this data comparable to what they could do with a clinical trial. We're not talking all clinical trials. There's still phase 1, phase 2, the interventional arm of phase 3 clinical trials, which, you cannot replace, but the placebo arm for the standard of care for all of the phase 4 trials to track comparative effectiveness, safety, off-label use, all those things. Those should be queries of a data set. But how do you build confidence? How do you build confidence that the query of this data set can be reasoned against and make life-impacting decisions against? It's shocking. Like, wait a second. Instead of spending $50 million in 2 years collecting this data, I can just run a query. The answer is yes. But building trust and confidence in that is a lot of work, a lot of investments, and it's going to take some time. But I think that is a big part of the transformation that I think we can bring to healthcare is those slow and expensive clinical trials and registries. Not all of them, but many of them can be replaced by a query.
So if you think back on the last few decades in healthcare with data, before you had electronic medical records and before you could really connect them, you had claims data. And what you'd see about claims data was that, what was valuable about it, people had to put certain information down so they'd get paid. So those fields were filled in well, and the payment amount, was accurate and all that. But essentially using it for clinical purposes or other purposes is just purely a byproduct. So you have to wonder, using a byproduct for something. Now, for the electronic medical record data, theoretically, it should be that's clinical information. That's the kind of information you want. But at the same time, a lot of the reason it's done is for, it's recorded in the first place is for administrative purposes, compliance purposes, and to get paid. And so a question I've always had is, can you really get the data? Can you really, how much can you rely on electronic medical record data? Or even if you really get to the core of what it is it really going to give you the clinical information that's comparable to a clinical trial? Or are you still getting a byproduct of something that was put in place in order for someone to get paid?
The data that's recorded by your physician is, that's the data that's being used to make your to chart your medical course. And so they're definitely, the claims data has this economic bias to it. I just don't think, whether it is I do believe, there is influence over what gets coded to either maximize or minimize reimbursement. And I think as these claims get, the advantage of claims is you see everything, whether it takes place inside a healthcare system or not. And that coding, that structured coding, absolutely has economic bias to it, but it has this longitudinal completeness. With the medical records, when I look at the clinical notes, de-identified that doctors are writing that says, Terry's reporting with pain in his left knee. It's been there for 3 months and now he's worried about his hamstring, whatever they're writing there in those clinical notes or in those images or in that genetic test. Those are I believe that's unbiased medical facts. But the coding of medical records into claims are a byproduct of the medical record. There's bias there. I just think, I think all parties try and, operate with integrity. But there's plenty, there's humans here that, when we say, when a payer says we pay more for X instead of Y, the payer's trying to get the claim changed to Y and the provider's trying to make the claim say X. And I think that's why revenue cycle management is such a hard problem. But the clinical notes, the images, the genetic tests, the lab tests, these are medical facts. And none of those are in claims. The lab test results are not in the claim. The clinical notes are not in the claim. The images are not in the claim. The genetic test is not in the claim. And in that rich clinical data, I think there's just incredible insights on how to take care of our communities and take care of each of us.
So let's talk about genetics for a minute. You recently announced the Truveta Genome Project, not to be confused with the Human Genome Project, which preceded it. What is this project and what are you hoping to, I won't say achieve, what are you hoping to get out of it?
Well, so the data, we've now been working on collecting this complete, timely, and clean, de-identified data set of medical outcomes across the US. And that's incredibly useful for studying safety and effectiveness. And it's great. We're on this journey with so many customers now to think about where they can where can they get insights from this safety and effectiveness data that doesn't require these slow and expensive trials and registries? But when you think about moving upstream into drug discovery or actually developing new therapeutics, just knowing outcomes is insufficient. And so for there, you're curious about the genetic makeup that might lead to these medical outcomes, or the proteins in the body that may be leading to these medical outcomes. But the challenge is that data doesn't exist. It's not collected during our care because it's expensive to do so, and because there's no clinical decision just going to get made. If you go and do a genetic sequence of one of us in care, and the doctor's given this 25 gigabyte binary file, the doctor's like, what do I do with this? This is I spent all this money to get this test, and I can't reason against this. There's no tools to process. There's nothing that's going to change in your course of care because we don't know. And so to me, it's this chicken and egg problem that we've had to say, how do we create this data to be able to not only discover new therapies, but to go figure out how to use the data in care. And what we've created with the Regeneron Genetics Center and Illumina investing to make this happen is, with these incredible visionary health systems that see the benefit here, they see the benefit of, precision medicine, and let's go invest our time and effort to go create this data set that maps our genetics to medical outcomes, so we can learn how to do precision medicine and we can discover new therapies. And the way it works is when you go to one of our member health systems, you'll be presented with the option to participate within the Truveta Genome Project. You will have the option to consent that your leftover blood from the blood draw you're already taking be used for this anonymous genetic research. So it's an option that'll be presented to you. There's no incremental prick of the arm. There's no extra blood drawn. The idea is when your doctor ordered an A1C blood test or a cholesterol test, whatever your doctor may have ordered during your course of care, there's always leftover, not always, but there's often leftover blood. And that leftover blood today is incinerated or some other safe medical disposal procedure. And here we're saying, let us use that leftover blood anonymously to create genetic data so we can study the correlation between genetic data and medical outcomes. And what's, for me personally, I absolutely, I get care at Virginia Mason, which is a division of Common Spirit Health, and my wife gets care at Swedish Hospital, which is a division of Providence Health. And I think we're passionately both ready to consent and be part of this so that we can discover things that will not only take care of us individually, but our children and our children's children and the communities. This knowledge could unlock so much incredible insights that could just transform how diseases are, detected, prevented, and cured. And so I think it was just, it's one of those opportunities. The admission incentive is there. There are economic incentives are there to actually take this and create this. Man, it's very expensive to do this, but the insights we can create could be so profound for the health of our communities. So that's what we announced.
So let's talk about GLP-1 drugs. They've kind of taken the world by storm, originally for diabetes, weight loss, and expanding into other indications. There's a lot of money that's being spent, a lot of clinical trials that show very good results. But the question is then always, well, what's the real world impact, especially as we're spending, so much money on these products? Now, this is a little different from what we were talking about before, where you can do a, click of a button and it's a lot less expensive than a clinical trial. Here, we actually don't want a clinical trial. Here, we want to know sort of the real world impact on lots of people. And the impact is that so much money is being spent overall. You've got a new JAMA article that I think analyzes real world impact, perhaps using some of your data. Can you provide some insight on that?
Well, the study that was published in JAMA there was a study of the Truveta data. It was Providence Healthcare, University of Pennsylvania, and a researcher at Truveta. And it was, a query of the data and then studying that data and, going through the peer review process to get it in JAMA. But it was basically showing that folks are staying on these drugs, for less than a year. We were looking at reasons for discontinuation based upon, again, those clinical notes. What did the doctor write in the notes? Why did you discontinue? And there was variance in rationale between how long people were staying on the drugs, but there was a correlation between, the household income of the patients and their length of time on the drug. And I would refer people to the actual study I'm not the researcher, so I don't want to misquote it, but I thought this is great to actually look at, what is the real world adherence by patients of different household incomes to the GLP-1 medication. And obviously, I think it's natural to assume that correlation being led to household income is connected to the price of the medication that people are having to spend out of pocket to get it. But
Well, I just think it's I didn't need you to be the PI on it, but I think it's just a good example of we have this large scale data that's not in a controlled trial, but is looking at the overall impact, because we know there's a lot of spending that's going on and a lot of assumptions being made, but we don't really know, what it's like for all those patients that weren't on the trial and don't conform to those exact inclusion and exclusion criteria.
There's thousands of patients being studied. One of the GLP-1 studies was like 18,000 patients. And these are patients that make it through a strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. And you're looking at and then you're just, creating cohorts to compare. Whether you're comparing Ozempic and Mounjaro, or comparing patients of two different, or a set of household income stratifications. But that's the kind of work that's very easy to do with Truveta. And we love it when customers dig in and, start, it's the scientific method. You start with a thesis, you then, acquire data to test your thesis. And then sometimes your thesis is proven correct. Sometimes your thesis is proven false, but then you iterate on the question, the analytics, the statistics, and you discover an insight, and then you share it with the world through the peer review process or email.
That sounds good. Well, there's a new administration in Washington. And my first thought when you started talking about the CDC was, are those guys still around? But in any case, what has it meant so far for Truveta, and what do you expect longer term?
Well, I think the CDC plays an important role to monitor the public health of the U.S. So I think, the specifics of what every organization does and the scope, I don't completely understand all the things the CDC does, but I think the CDC does play an important role to monitor the health of our country. So the CDC is still around. I mean, they're still a customer, and my team's working with them every day. And so I feel incredibly humbled to be working with the CDC, or CMS, FDA, all of these incredible, the Office of Women's Health. There's some incredible people and organizations within Health and Human Services, and how, I think there's room for, all of us need to keep learning and improving and growing. And what will change? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not part of those conversations of what will change.
Good. All right. That's a solid answer. I'm going to take it as a true answer, but also
I don't know. We are serving their missions, and I think their missions are fantastic and worthy. And will the details of how they pursue those missions change? I assume, because we got the administration. But I don't know. I don't think the CDC is going to stop monitoring the health of the United States. I think it's an important mission, and we'll see how things evolve.
Okay, fair enough. Well, last question for you is about a book recommendation. And I'm wondering if there's any books you've read lately, or whenever, anything that you would recommend. And conversely, if you have anything that you want to recommend that people should avoid reading.
I'm not going to recommend anyone avoid reading anything. I think reading is terrific. I'll tell you, a book I just got recommended to me. Let me go over to my email here. That I got this really strong recommendation. The Genome Odyssey, Medical Mysteries and the Incredible Quest to Solve Them. That was a book that got recommended to me yesterday. Someone said, I think you're going to love it. So but I haven't read it. But somebody with my reading taste said, I think you'll love it.
It sounds good, and it sounds relevant for your work and for the genome project that you're working on as well. No, that's terrific. I have had the occasional person that says, they don't like to read and they just like to watch something. So that would be better. But most people have something. That sounds like a good one. I'll pick it up when I have a chance. Well, my guest today has been Terry Myerson, CEO and co-founder of Truveta, saving lives with data. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Terry, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.